In the 1740s, the last surviving child of Louis XIV passed away. France was ruled by his great-grandson, and the revolution that would one day sweep away the monarchy and overturn the old order was still about half a century away. In Asia, China was enjoying a golden age under the Qing dynasty, and Japan would remain closed off to the outside world for over 100 years to come. The continent of Australia wasn't yet home to a single European, and the thought of the British colonies in America rebelling was to many unthinkable. In European art, the new big thing was the Rococo style, and in the courts on the continent, fashion was characterized by elaborate gowns, embroidered waistcoats and wigs. This world may seem very distant to us, but it was around this time that the earliest generation of people ever to be photographed were born. At the end of their lives, after photography had been made available to the public in 1839, some of them appeared before the camera to have their faces immortalized. This means that we can actually look directly into the eyes of people from the 18th century, people who would have witnessed things like the American Revolution, who probably interacted with people born in the 17th century and lived their entire lives in a time before states like Germany or Italy even existed yet. In this video, we'll uncover the stories behind some of these people, find out what they experienced over the course of their long lives, and try to find the earliest born person ever photographed. The first person we'll look at spent much of his life here in Oxford and served as president of Magdalen College for no less than 63 years right up until his death. His name was Martin Ruth, and in his last year at 99 years old, he was photographed sitting in a study. He'd been born in 1755, and although that doesn't put him very close to the record of the oldest person photographed, it does make him the same age as Marie Antoinette. He is also said to have had an aunt who once met a lady who saw King Charles I in Oxford, the same king who was executed in 1649. Described by one historian as a mysterious dream of the past, he never really left the 18th century and continued to turn up wearing his old wig and buckled shoes. Referred to as the Venerable Dr. Ruth already in his 40s, he was a respected classical scholar focusing on the writings of the early church fathers. In connection with the publication of a work of his in 1814, he was described in the following way. Martin Ruth is of the right stamp, orthodox but not intolerant, profound, not obscure, wary, not skeptical, very, very, very learned, not pedantic at all. There are many fond stories about him, but he is best known today for his response to John Bergen, who, towards the end of Ruth's life, asked him for some words of advice to live by. He answered, "I think, sir, since you come for the advice of an old man, sir, you will find it a very good practice always to verify your references, sir." He passed away in 1854 and is said to have left behind, quote, "a vast void, strange and unaccountable." According to one story, his last words were uttered when he collapsed, taking a heavy volume from a high shelf in his library, exclaiming, "A worthless volume, sir, a worthless volume." Others claim that he died through chagrin at the fall of Russian stock prices in connection with the Crimean War, and that his last words, spoken to his housekeeper, were simply, "Don't trouble yourself." To find older subjects, we crossed the Atlantic to the United States. Here, photography quickly became popular, and several people who were born decades before the country itself were captured on camera. One of them was Samuel Sprague, a Mason from Hingham, Massachusetts, who served in the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War. He was present at the siege of Boston and the battles of Trenton and Princeton. But not only that, as a 19-year-old, he took part in the Boston Tea Party as well. About this, he related the following. "That evening, while on my way to visit the young woman I afterwards married, I met some lads hurrying towards Griffin's Wharf who told me there was something going on there. I joined them, and on reaching the wharf found the Indians busy with the tea chests. Wishing to have my share of the fun, I looked about for a means of disguising myself. Spying a low building with a stovepipe by way of chimney, I climbed the roof and obtained a quantity of soot with which I blackened my face. Joining the party, I recognized among them Mr. Etheridge, my master. We worked together, but neither of us ever afterwards alluded to each other's share in the proceedings. Having been born in 1753, Sprague died aged 90 in 1844. He and his wife Joanna lived in a house on Orange Street, now Washington Street in Boston, and their fourth son, Charles Sprague, went on to become a famous poet in the 19th century. Another veteran of the Revolutionary War was Conrad Heyer. Born in 1749, he was a farmer from Waldoboro, Maine, and lived to the ripe old age of 106. His village had been completely destroyed by Native American attacks in the 1740s and was resettled by German immigrants from the Rhineland. Among them were Conrad's parents, and Conrad himself is claimed to have been the first child born in the settlement. During the Revolution, he fought for the Continental Army under the command of George Washington, and although this is disputed, he is said to have participated in Washington's famous crossing of the Delaware before the Battle of Trenton in December 1776. He was discharged a year later and spent the rest of his life on the farm. In 1856, he was buried with full military honors. Conrad Heyer is often said to be the earliest born person ever photographed, but there are photos of even older people whose birth dates have been verified. One of them is Mary Monroe Sanderson, a woman from Lexington, Massachusetts. She was born in 1748 in a part of Lexington called Scotland because of the large number of Scottish immigrants who had settled there and reportedly kept a little of the Scottish accent all her life. In 1772, she married cabinet maker Samuel Sanderson, and together they lived in this house, which is still standing today. Samuel was a corporal in the local militia, and 3 years later, he fought against the British in the Battle of Lexington, where the first shots of the Revolutionary War were fired. After the battle, when Mary returned to her home, she found that many of her things had been stolen and her cow had been killed. As if that wasn't enough, she discovered a wounded British soldier left behind lying in her bed. She refused to have him there and asked why nobody had, quote, knocked him on the head. But the authorities insisted that she should take care of him, and after strong protests, she reluctantly agreed. Realizing how unwelcome he was, the soldier refused to eat or drink unless the food was tasted by some member of the family. Mary lived to become a centenarian and passed away in 1852, aged 104. This photo of her was taken just a few months earlier. Mary may well be the earliest born woman ever photographed. The earliest born man, on the other hand, that has been verified is probably this gentleman. His name was John Adams, no relation to the president of the same name. He was a shoemaker from Worcester, Massachusetts, and his date of birth has been confirmed by the New England Historic Genealogical Society to be either 1744 or 45. That would make him about 10 years older than Louis XVI and 10 years younger than the other John Adams. He died on the 26th of March 1849 in Hartford, Pennsylvania, aged 104. If we look at photos of people whose birth dates haven't been confirmed, however, we can go even further. The man in this picture is Caesar, an ex-slave from the state of New York who may not have been manumitted until 1841. That would make him the last slave to be freed in the state. According to a slip of paper at the back of the photo, he was born a slave of a Rensselaer nickel on his property in Bethlehem, New York in the year 1737. Outliving at least 3 generations of masters, he was allowed to retire in 1817 at the age of 80 and lived with the Nickel family until his death in 1852. If the dates are correct, then he could have become 115 years old, making him one of the longest-lived Americans on record. But the very earliest claimed birth date that I could find was that of John Owen, born in Salisbury, Connecticut in 1735. Over the course of his life, Owen served not only in the American Revolutionary War, but even in the French and Indian War, which started in the 1750s. However, I can't confirm that the man in the picture really is Owen, and his birth date may be as late as 1741. Ultimately, it's impossible to say for certain who holds the record. It could be one of the people shown in this video, although there are other candidates that I haven't covered here. The photo of the real record holder could also have been destroyed over the course of history, or maybe it's still lying in someone's attic or in an old archive, gathering dust and waiting to be discovered.